My name is Mike Metzler. I work here at Conviva in the marketing department, and I'm the author of our social research reports here at the company, including our most recent TikTok benchmarks and strategy guide for brands. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, but we really have a truly incredible roster here. We have Tom from Overtime, which is the #1 sports media brand on TikTok. We have Dan from Guinness World Records, which according to our list is the #1 brand on TikTok. And we have Dimple from the United Nations Refugee Agency, which is one of the #1 nonprofits on TikTok. Those three accounts combined, just those three accounts have around 30 million followers just on TikTok, and that doesn't include their other social accounts. But I'll let them talk about who they are and what they do. So Tom, if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, what's going on, everyone? Thanks, Mike, for having us. This is awesome. Love talking about TikTok and everything. I'm Tom Weingarten. I run our social media over at Overtime. What we are is, of course, the phone goes off right when this happens. Leading sports brand for the next generation of young fans with over 50 million followers across all social media.
All right, and Dan?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, my name's Dan Thorne. I look after social media here at Guinness World Records. I've been at the company for about 8 years, and I guess, well, you guys have probably heard of Guinness World Records. We've had a book that's been going for nearly 60 years, and I guess it's been my job in recent years to really boost our online presence and make sure that we're out there in the modern world talking about really exciting new records that are being broken every day. So, and I get to kind of chip in on what we decide to put on our social platforms, which is a lot of fun because there's a lot to choose from.
And Dimple?
Everyone, I'm Dimple. I'm based in London, and I help manage the social media accounts of UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. So we're the agency tasked with protecting and supporting refugees, asylum seekers, anyone who's been forced to flee their home in any way. So I work with an amazing team all around the world, in New York, Canada, Geneva, to help create content for our channels. But then my specific remit also focuses on leveraging the voices and talents and platforms of our celebrity supporters, goodwill ambassadors, and influencers. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you, guys. So let's get started. So I was listening to a podcast yesterday as I was prepping for this webinar, and it had TikTok's head of global agency and accounts, Khartoon Weiss, and she said something that matched up so perfectly with the theme for this webinar that I just wanted to share. She said that 2020 was the year TikTok was tested, and 2021 will be the year that TikTok is trusted. And I think that fits perfectly with what we've seen brands do on the platform and the ways that most brands are viewing TikTok right now, especially in comparison to how they were in, Q1 2020, the before times, or late 2019. It's so vastly different for how a lot of these agencies, organizations, brands are viewing TikTok and engaging with it than it was then. That the only way to really describe it is that there's been trust built. So we see brands shifting their entire social strategies to focus on TikTok as a platform and really as a community builder, because it's so different than anything else that exists right now. So today, we're really going to talk about that shift and what it takes, and talk about what has to happen for that trust to be built, and really that change from TikTok experiment to social strategy and what that looks like. So if we wanted to start at the beginning, I think, Dan, you were one of the first brands to jump on and really invest. I think it was early 2019. I think that it feels like a lifetime ago. But if you could talk about that choice to jump on TikTok when it was still such a young platform, then if you, Dimple, can talk about what it took to get the agency buy-in from the UN, and then Tom, if you could chat about why Overtime made the jump when they did. So kick it off to you, Dan.
Sure, thanks, Mike. So yeah, we've been on TikTok since January 2019, I think it was. And for me, I think it was really important for us to experiment with TikTok. It looked like an interesting new platform. I'd say that my radar for new interesting platforms was sparked by the previous success of Snapchat, and I think to begin with, as a brand, we didn't jump on board with Snapchat early enough. So I've always been on the lookout for other opportunities. So, and also what was really interesting is some reports that were coming in from our office in Beijing. So we have a few different offices around the world. We have one in Tokyo, we have one in Beijing, we have one in Dubai, and one in New York, and we have adjudicators placed all over the world. But in our Beijing office, they were seeing some really interesting results for short form platforms that were just emerging there. So Kuaishou and Douyin. A lot of the content that we'd edited for our global platforms, my colleague Echo had started to try out on these new channels, and she'd seen a lot of success from it, and she was reporting on a weekly basis to say, you know, this was a big hit here, why don't you try it on Instagram or what have you. So I think I went along to an interesting agency talk, a guy called OTB, who's a creator on TikTok. He was there talking about his journey on Musical.ly. And I think for him, Musical.ly and then TikTok had become a really interesting platform to experiment with. And he'd been putting a lot of effort into YouTube in creating these kind of interesting comedy videos. And they just weren't finding the audience. They weren't finding that traction. So he tried it on Musical.ly and he found an audience and he kind of started to grow. So I kind of took that on board as well. And yeah, thought we'd give it a try. And I think from what I could see, there was a lot of really fun and surprising stuff on there that sort of seemed to fit with the kind of content that we often share on social as well.
And what was the reaction to some of the leadership, or you know, the establishment, as some might say? Was it, you know, I mean, I really remember early on TikTok, I was just dancing and kids. So you guys were on there early. Was there any, you know, concerns at that time?
I guess there was. I mean, I think my manager always says, you know, just try these things out, you know, see how they go. And I think there were, you know, some concerns about in the early days, but actually for the most part, everything was pretty supportive, and we could see that it was something that was working almost straight away. You know, the reaction was good. There was a lot of content that we previously seen had done well on other platforms, so we started off experimenting with that because it was kind of tried and tested. So I think our biggest, one of our first hits was the moment that the tallest man in the world, Sultan Kozan, met the shortest man in the world, Chandra Dengi, in London, and we did a nice little kind of size height comparison thing, and they met each other, and it was all quite heartwarming, and that really kicked off, and for that became, I think, the most viewed video in the UK for a short time. And so we could see the results were positive, and we were able to sort of say to our managers and marketing teams, you know, this actually looks like a great place for us.
And what about you, Dimple? I've worked with UNICEF and the United Nations in the past, and it's sometimes a challenge to get new things going, or even to work with outside agencies. What was that like whenever you were getting started on TikTok at the very beginning? How did you get that buy-in?
So it was back in probably summer 2019, where we in the social team were starting to notice kind of the rise of TikTok, and a lot of kind of memes and funny videos were originating from TikTok. And so we had an honest discussion as a team about, you know, capacity, resource, and whether or not it'd be worth launching a new channel. And honestly, there were a lot of challenges. It was a new platform, which meant we had no idea what content would work. We had to consider, you know, team resource, especially when we already had 4 to 5 other channels to feed. And of course, the big thing, as you've said, is how can we sell something like TikTok to senior leadership when social itself is so new, especially at UNHCR. I think what swung it for us was that we knew this could be probably like a once in a decade chance to be an early adopter on a burgeoning social media platform. And we were starting to see other foundations and charities like the World Economic Forum, like UNICEF, starting to kind of open accounts and get on board. And so before we actually did anything, me and my excellent colleague Sylvie, who's the head of social video, we basically sat down for 2 days and locked ourselves away to write a strategy for TikTok, using what we call at UNHCR the creative process, which is basically like a template that we use to figure out why any comms project or anything in comms is worth doing. And so we figured out what our goals were in regard to launching on TikTok. And the first of that was to basically reach new untapped audiences, you know, people who wouldn't be familiar with UNHCR or the UN, The next was to amplify, refugee voices and help them tell their stories. And the last was to build that brand recognition amongst these new audiences. And so it was very much like a strategic decision. We didn't just open the account and kind of figure it out. We knew that like the audience that we wanted to reach just wasn't being served on other platforms like Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. And so if we wanted to reach those audiences, we needed to be where they were. And so we put together the strategy, and we took it to, our managers and managers manager, and essentially said, let's do this and let's see where we are in a year. And if we fail, we fail. And if we don't, then great. We've tried something and it's worked. And so we did feel I think we were quite blessed in that we felt quite empowered to kind of take it forward. And then I think also for us, we reached out to TikTok for Good, who are really excellent. And we built and cultivated a really warm relationship with TikTok themselves, who really helped us launch on the platform, get onboarded, and basically gave us advice on what's going to work and what's not going to work. So yeah, a lot of thought went into launching on TikTok, whereas I'm sure that when people were first starting to launch social media brands on social media, it was kind of let's open it and see what happens. Whereas for this, it was very much a lot of work had to go into it before we even posted a TikTok in the first place. So yeah.
And what sort of time commitment were you thinking that this platform was going to take at the very beginning?
So at the beginning, it did, especially mine and Sylvie's time, it took up probably much more than we thought, because content that's on TikTok is just so optimized for that platform. You can't just like repost something from Facebook and Twitter to TikTok. It has to be very much packaged up for that platform, for that audience, and the tone and content is so different. And actually what we did first is we actually really didn't tell many people within the organization that we were launching a TikTok, and we just said, let's just go for it. And then once it does well, which we were really hoping it did, then we'd say, we experimented and we tested and we learned what worked on the platform. So, at the beginning, we got on board with TikTok for Good, and then we launched our first challenge in the winter of 2019, along with a public awareness campaign. And the success of that basically meant, and also the COVID in 2020 basically meant that, we were seeing results there that we weren't seeing on other social media platforms in terms of engagement, in terms of brand awareness, in terms of shares and comments and all of that. And so we basically started to prioritize that after we were seeing these results, because we knew what we were doing was paying off. Whereas if it wasn't paying off, then maybe we wouldn't have put so much resource into it like we do now.
And Tom, so sports media has really gone, all in on TikTok, it seems, from, Overtime to Wave to House of Highlights to ESPN. There's a lot of content around the sports world that fits perfectly within the TikTok genre and what works there. So when I imagine the decision to jump on TikTok was probably not, well, should we do this? It was probably, we know we need to, but how did you prepare to jump on and get started on TikTok? Tom? Hello?
Hey, Mike, sorry, I don't know what just happened, but could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I imagine that the decision to jump on TikTok for Overtime is not so much, do we need to get on, more like we know we need to, how are we going to do it? So can you talk about the decision to, prep and launch and get started on there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we got started somewhere around 2019 also. We've always been looking for kind of an opportunity to be one of the first companies or sports brands on a platform, because for us, like we're a bit newer. So like we never had that opportunity on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube. So this was like a really cool opportunity. At first, like we've seen a lot of different apps jump in and out. So at first it was really our CEO, Dan, who was kind of like, hey, let's get started on this. Let's try it. So at first we gave it to our talent, our internal talent. We're like, hey, like just run this page, start, going more of the dancing route, all of that type of stuff. It wasn't, and after like a couple of weeks, it was like, oh, like actually like rethinking about it, like we could just do what we already are really good at and kind of bring a whole entire different flavor to TikTok. So that's when we started doing that. It was pretty, no resources behind it in the early stages. Just like it was really just me just like throwing out different things that we had tried in other places. We film a lot of our own content. So we had just a stockpile of all these clips that had gone viral on Twitter and Instagram in the past. So and really like we've kind of still gone with that flow. I mean, it's not like we're pouring in all these resources to TikTok. We've really just relied on our social team to kind of figure it out and use some of the things that we've had in the past. And as you mentioned, it's super competitive, like in the sports space, especially on these viral clips. And on other social platforms, it's really just who's the biggest and who gets those clips out. Where on TikTok, it's more about speed, and the way their algorithm works. It's more about who can get it out first. And that's always been our strongest suit. We haven't always been the biggest on every other platform, but we've always been the fastest. So to be able to utilize like TikTok was kind of the perfect combination of like our best skill set as a team, and working with that algorithm. So that's kind of how we just got started and jumped in, just testing out as much as possible.
You talk about your team, and according to at least my metrics on the main Overtime account by itself, you posted 1,200 videos in the last year. That's around 3 or 4 per day. And that's just one account, and you guys have many Overtime accounts. So can you talk about what the team looks like and what you have to do to really support this? Because I don't think people realize how much content 3 to 4 videos a day is on a certain platform, and optimizing that, not to mention you might have 10 other accounts that you're doing.
Yeah. Super lucky to have just like an awesome rock star squad. We already post 15 times a day on Instagram, 20 times a day on Instagram story, another 15 times on Twitter and Facebook. So like to add 4 posts a day was actually like not impossible for our group. And I was very lucky and thankful that they were down for it and they get excited by the challenge. But how it looks is, in the early stages, it was pretty easy. Like we were just taking what we were posting on those other pages and just reposting it kind of on TikTok and taking some of the things that we had done in the past. Now, as we start to get more creative and start to try new things and have to keep pushing the envelope, I think in the next year, you'll see us dedicate more time to that. But for right now, it's, as you mentioned, we have all different pages. So the Overtime main account has 16 million followers, and so I run that and our Instagram page. So they work together. And same with our season team, which is our football page. The people that run our Instagram page on that also run our TikTok account. So like TikTok kind of put us at that max where like now we kind of need to figure out different ways to kind of, our biggest thing was like, we don't want to lose what we're doing on our other pages. We don't want to post less on Instagram just to post on TikTok. So it hasn't affected us deeply there, other than the team just grinding a little bit harder. But you're right, to post that often and to post that many times, especially as TikTok gets more difficult and more people are on there, and you've seen it with all the other social platforms that happen, it becomes more of a challenge. And whether it's adding resources or figuring out different ways to do it, I think will be like our next test.
Yeah. So, Dan, I've got a question for you. So, talking about content, you have you had stated that you have a plethora of content that goes all the way back to 1955, really. How did the content start out? Well, whenever you were first posting, you posted that first video of the tallest and shortest man. And how has your content evolved? Are you making original content for TikTok? When did that change happen?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tom. So I would say that to begin with, we were relying on our greatest hits, like Tom was saying. We have a lot of UGC content coming into us on a day-to-day basis where it's just been approved by our records team. So I'd say there was a switch over fairly early from the kind of content that works well on TikTok that is also the kind of video evidence that's submitted for our record attempt. So working very closely with my colleague Matt, who's our video editor, and we worked together for many years. Matt and I would talk about the kind of thing that we'd really like to see on there, and the kind of thing that necessarily wasn't going to work on other platforms, because a lot of our record attempts are very, very quick, very fast moving. Some of them are done in 30 seconds, some of them are done in 1 minute. Actually, a 1 minute record attempt is actually a bit too long for TikTok, but I'd say that we were immediately taking note of what was working and what wasn't, and just trying to keep up to date with, because we don't have a lot of archive stuff that goes right back to the 50s and 60s, to be honest. There's a lot of things have been lost along the way, different people have joined the company, all that kind of thing. So the majority of video content, I think, that we put out now is either within the last 2 months or within the last sort of 4 years or so. We've had a lot of TV shows from around the globe from over the years, and actually I'm always surprised, like on a day-to-day basis, it's going through our archives, I often get surprises of some stuff that I've never seen before that was on a TV show in China 5 years ago or something like that, or a really interesting record attempt from Turkey, from a show that we did there in like 1997. So actually, for me, it's a journey of discovery as well as for the audience. And often I'll find something, and if I get the same reaction from of sort of that surprise and delight that I would get from, I imagine our TikTok audience would get, then that I kind of get the feeling that, yeah, this is definitely something that's worth sharing. And I think TikTok is about those sort of surprising moments. Really, people are looking for that. What really stands out and what's kind of got that human element to it. People on TikTok, I feel it's about humans watching other humans, and sort of that slightly quirky nature of what human beings do. Something that's a little bit fun and quirky. So that's often the kind of records that I would select for the platform.
And you talked a little bit about UGC. I imagine that maybe it's a little bit off base from TikTok, but I'm fascinated with how Guinness World Records has evolved. Are people submitting videos of themselves that have like a clock behind them? And then you are reposting them? How does UGC work for you guys? Especially last year in the pandemic when everybody was by themselves. I imagine that was probably a saving grace for a lot of things.
Yeah, I think, we've had this system in place for a number of years now where you can break a record just by attempting it at home, but you do need independent witnesses, people that aren't necessarily members of your family, or, it can be your local priest or something like that. But there does need to be on-screen evidence of the timings and photos and independent witness statements. And in some cases, there needs to be kind of evidence from an expert, say someone who is a surveyor or an architect, or so we have every record's different really in terms of the guidelines and requirements. But what it basically boils down to is that we are regularly being sent footage that's been filmed by people on their phones, where they've attempted a record and they've submitted that evidence to us, and so then we decide whether or not it gets included in like the best of the month on YouTube, or whether it's suitable for TikTok, or if it's a little bit more long form, then maybe it will be a Facebook video or something like that. So.
Cool. That's fair. I mean, I remember growing up and always reading the Guinness Book of World Records, getting it every single year. So it's fascinating to see how the shift has changed from reading the book to now watching it on TikTok and YouTube, and it really is a multi-generational brand that you guys have that I think my kids are going to enjoy watching, and I'm going to enjoy watching with them.
I hope so. Yeah, and it works as well for my daughter. She loves watching record attempts, but she has to all the time. She's always sitting by me. But I should also mention that we do have a number of adjudicators, and there is still the kind of the lady or the man in the suit, and actually attending the record attempts. But there hasn't been a lot of that in the last year, of course, as you'd imagine. So there have been a number of record challenges that we put out there that were just on TikTok, which kind of didn't really need a lot of equipment for. So we were putting it out as a weekly GWR challenge, and just asking people to duet with it, which is where TikTok really comes to life, right? So that kind of element of interaction and duetting and splicing and things like that.
And Dimple, I have a question for you. So we record breaking and sports highlights are one thing, but the content that you make is so much different than a lot of the brands that exist on TikTok. But also the content that you make on your account is very intentionally for TikTok, from the captions to the background music to the trends that you jump on. Um, I'm fascinated to really understand what's the process like for deciding what stories to tell. How does a video of a Rwanda refugee getting the COVID vaccine, how does that story end up on TikTok? I imagine there's lots of really heartwarming, heartfelt, and important stories to tell. How do you go about starting and making a piece of content all the way to trying to fit it into an existing TikTok trend or format?
So I'm in the global social media team, but we work with content bureaus and hubs and national social media managers like across the world, all of whom are, every day creating their own content, going out and capturing stories. And we work very closely with all of them, and often they could pitch ideas to us, or they might already be creating a video for another campaign, and the story instantly for us seems like it's worth going on TikTok. With the COVID thing, I would say that TikTok is actively, or was, especially throughout 2020, actively pushing content to do with COVID, especially educational content around COVID to combat misinformation, as well as kind of positive stories around COVID and everything really. So we kind of constantly test and learn and see, what's getting traction, what isn't, and then we build upon that. And we knew that COVID related content was going to get picked up because of the algorithm, because it was being talked about, because of the trending hashtags. And so we do, whenever there is an opportunity to create content around COVID, we did used to kind of act on that as soon as we could, essentially. And we are also guided by kind of our external engagement calendar, which kind of has moments, anniversaries, campaigns that are important to UNHCR that we then have to basically create content on for all channels. And so we always think, what is the angle here for TikTok? So for example, we just had Mother's Day, and we had a beautiful kind of poem written by a young refugee girl, which we then kind of created a slick social video for that, which did really, really well. And then we kind of took that and stripped it back to its raw clip, and then added captions and sort of trending music and niche hashtags, and a nice message, because we know that those kind of feel good clips of, positivity or heartwarmingness do really well. We kind of actively basically wanted to move away, especially last year, we wanted to move away from kind of doom scrolling to what we call joy scrolling, where like every kind of single video gives you like a shot of serotonin, essentially. But also, having said that, we deal with a lot of crises and emergencies, every day, all the time, by virtue of, being UNHCR. And what we've noticed more and more is that serious content, which follows a serious emergency, does have cut through as well, especially amongst that kind of socially conscious, teenagers and young people. So for example, last year in November, I don't know if you're all familiar, but basically a lot of people were fleeing the Tigray region in Ethiopia, but they were fleeing violence. And that was making, headlines around the world. It's a really heartbreaking situation. And UNHCR were on the ground, from the beginning, helping families and those in need. And so we captured some really powerful, emotional testimonies. And we started experimenting on TikTok to see whether that was getting cut through in sort of kind of twofold way of either to raise awareness of the crisis or to persuade people to find out more about what was happening, and then to eventually either give money or share it or whatever it may be. And basically TikTok picked up that it was that one of the videos in particular, which was basically a piece of camera from a refugee who, it was just a really powerful clip of him telling his story of fleeing violence. And that just went insane for us. And people were saying, I'm commenting so that it'll get boosted in the algorithm and it'll appear on more people's For You pages. So like, it's quite interesting how our audience knows knows the algorithm as well as much as a brand does, and they know when something deserves to be seen by more people. And so we've created a very dedicated community who knows and cares about the content that we post. So kind of to answer your question, it's kind of a mixture. We're kind of led by a mixture of things, whether it's a news headline or an emergency or anniversary or moment or campaign that we've got coming up, or if we just think it's a feel-good story. You know, some of our heartwarming content like family reunions do really well, because it again captures that moment of positivity, but then also raises awareness of how difficult it can be to reunite families who've been torn apart, who are refugees. So yeah, kind of mixture of educational, emotional, engaging content, really.
And have you seen, for the things that work on TikTok, it probably did force you to branch out and start making content in a new way, especially is there any trends that you've taken from TikTok that you've applied, the style or storytelling to other platforms?
We are doing more and more presenter-led content. So my colleague Jack is now actually our TikTok lead. And if you go on @refugees on TikTok, you'll see a lot of his face now.
Yeah, he's great.
And so which is great. So he will very much organize our lineup for the week. And if it's an issue where we don't have, assets from the ground or clips that kind of work, but we still think we can insert UNHCR's voice into a conversation around a trending hashtag, then Jack will often put himself in front of the camera, or he'll put one of us, and we will try and, cleverly talk about a topic which is also relatable because we've used a trend that's on TikTok. And so we're doing more of that presenter-led content on other channels as well, kind of voiceover-led content. And then, of course, reposting TikToks to other channels can actually do really well as well, especially on Reels. So we're doing more of that as well. It's really interesting because if you create, a social video for Facebook, you can't use it on TikTok, but 100% you can use a TikTok on Instagram or on Twitter. So that is a big benefit for us. It's kind of, two birds, one stone situation. So yeah.
And you touched on something that I want to talk to you, Tom, is that people are commenting, for the algorithm, but commenting itself is almost a second part of TikTok. You watch the video and then you can go to the comments and you read them and you enjoy the videos in new ways. But I also noticed that over time, comments a lot. Like they comment on a lot of different videos. It's a very outbound strategy. And I know that that's not necessarily a new strategy to raise awareness or get in front of people. You see that on Instagram all the time, that the verified handles rise to the top, and it's a good way to be discovered. But what's the value in a viral comment on TikTok?
Yeah.
And how do you go about doing that? Is it just somebody that's just, okay, this is funny? Is there any sort of review process for that? Or you trust your team to, say some funny stuff or meaningful or impactful?
Yeah, I think building a community has always been Overtime's biggest passion, right? And so it started for us on Instagram. We reply to every single comment on our IG, and we've been doing that for years now. And we've always kind of just commented on whatever we could do, and then getting on TikTok and seeing that comment section, which is wild, by the way, to see comments with 200,000 likes and random things. And I've even started using some people's comments as our Instagram captions and crediting them, and that creates a cool cycle. But for us, commenting on other people's stuff, I use Overtime's TikTok as my personal TikTok, and that's all of our social pages. So if we think something's funny and we like the video, we're gonna comment as if we would from our personal pages. And some of them are really funny and rise to the top, and some of them just and having the blue check obviously helps. So there's not really a huge review process or anything. It's just hey, if you like a video and you think it's cool, go ahead and dive in on that. And obviously the home run is when you comment on a video early that is going to turn viral, right? So
yeah, investing at 5 likes. that
exactly. So investing something smaller and throwing a comment on there, and I remember one of them I just happened to see Dixie D'Amelio posted a video 1 second after she posted, total accident. And I commented, and I checked back a week later, had like 600,000 likes. I was like, oh, that was amazing. But one other thing that I think is really cool, to go taking the comment part a step further, that we always saw was awesome, was I started joining a lot of people's lives. TikTok really pushes a lot of people's lives, and when a random creator is live with 15 people in their live and you comment from overtime and they tap on your name and see 16 million followers, they absolutely lose it. So I have like all these saved videos of people just going nuts from us commenting on it on a TikTok live and stuff. So the comment stuff is amazing, and taking it a step further and going into the live has been really successful for us too.
Yeah, I love that. It's all about community, and I think that that's something that a lot of people overlook with TikTok, is that you really are building a community, and that the younger generation, you're trying to build lifetime value with these people who are learning about you, and you really can have them become a fan for life with TikTok, whereas it's not necessarily that same way on a lot of other platforms right now. But I love the taking the comments and putting it on Instagram. Dan, for you, how has TikTok affected your other social channels? How do those interact? Has there been any learnings from TikTok to your YouTube or Instagram or any of your other channels?
Yeah, I'd say that as a group of content curators,
or Snapchat,
we do. We talk to each other all the time about what's working. We have our kind of morning catch up, and we talk to each other about what's working here and what's working there, and we suggest to each other, I think this would work well on your channel, kind of thing. So it's definitely informed our strategy to some extent on Snapchat Discover. We have a couple of shows on Snapchat Discover that go out twice a week. So I'd say that quite a few TikToks have ended up on there, or versions of, but also vice versa. I think if you see loads and loads of shares from a snap from a Snapchat Discover show that's really attracted attention, and maybe it hasn't already been on TikTok or Reels before, that we'll take note of that as well and make sure that gets out there as well. And I think we've seen some success on YouTube for compilations of kind of our TikTok greatest hits as well. So people seem to really enjoy watching TikTok videos on YouTube. Maybe I think that's probably more of a 2020, maybe 2019 thing, when TikTok was new and people were like, oh, let's make a compilation of all these videos that I can download for free and rip off someone. but yeah, it's
Vine compilations are still very popular online.
Vine, TikTok is basically like Vine's older brother, right? And the discipline that a lot of people used from creating really amazing Vines. There were some incredible creators on Vine, and I think the discipline from that has really leaked into TikTok ideas. Because TikTok, for a while, when it was still Musical.ly, it still had lots and lots of big followers, big accounts that were singing and dancing, like you were saying. But I think that TikTok wanted to embrace a wider range of content. So you've seen the growth of all kinds of different interesting ideas and really, really clever creators.
And I'll ask you this, Dan, and then feel free to answer, Tom or Dimple. What metrics are you looking at on TikTok right now? What's important to you? Is it reach, watch time, comments? What engagements are you tracking and trying to focus on? Like, okay, this one looks like it's trending in the right way. It could be a big one.
I think for anyone, I would advise anyone to really pay attention to the watch time, and that is the absolute key thing. Above and beyond anything else, above comments, above likes, above shares, is watch time. Watch time's the thing that will most likely get you into the For You feed, and it's so important that I'd say it was the most important factor, and we're always looking at that and kind of working out whether something's got enough to be more than 10 seconds, whether it's got enough to be 20 seconds. In some cases, very rare occasions, it's got enough to be like maybe 50 seconds if it's absolutely amazingly compelling. And if you've got a really great story to tell. So like some of our record holders have wonderful emotional stories about how they got to where they are, or they might want to talk about, what inspired them, and some really beautiful sound bites with some captions on screen. That goes a long way. So I think, If you've got a minute record attempt of a guy tearing license plates in half, that can be a really big hit, but don't put the whole minute on there from my perspective. But if you've got a really great emotional story, that can be a little bit longer, as long as it sort of unfolds and it's compelling and there's immediately something interesting going on screen.
And Tom or Dimple, do you have anything that you guys focus on, above all else?
Yeah, I think watch time obviously is like the big one. For us though, we still judge ourselves a lot on followers and views and video views overall. And the reason for that being, I feel like now we're at a size where we feel like the watch time is going to be there, right? Because we've gained enough of that. So now it's figuring out like how do we keep getting those followers and those views to keep rising. And with those two metrics, I think what it does for us is it kind of bleeds into everything else, right? If we have good like followers and views, it's pretty easy for us to be like, okay, like the likes are there, the comments are there. So that's something that I'm still looking at. And then with our newer accounts, when we first start, like watch time's the only thing we care about. Because like when you're starting from zero and you're starting brand new, it's like you have to get to that For You page. We have to get like that group. So those are the three metrics we're definitely looking at. I think as you know, TikTok just started allowing 3-minute videos. On that, I'm interested to see what the key metric will be to kind of get us there. I assume watch time will be even more important on the longer videos. So definitely those, I think people sometimes look for like the most extreme metric that like no one else can find. And oftentimes it's just like the one that's in the view of everyone else.
Yeah, I think Tom and Dan have basically summed it up there. I was just going to say, definitely watch time, super important. For us, also shares, to see whether it's living and breathing off TikTok as well, whether it's being, spread in WhatsApp groups and sort of closed communities as well. And then we're particularly obsessed with kind of weirdly like device settings, and which countries in particular certain videos are resonating. Like, for example, the Ethiopia one I talked about was really resonating in, Kenya, Rwanda, parts of Africa, where that emergency was a lot closer to home, whereas stories that are kind of US based are more like Canada, North America. And so we really try and think about how the algorithm is serving the content to which For You pages and which audiences, in order to make sure that the message that we're trying to get in that video reaches the right people that we want to reach.
That's fascinating. So we have, I've got one more question for you all, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. And so each one of you could touch on this. And do you consider TikTok now as an important part of your brand, maybe where it wasn't before? Like, how has it helped your brand identity? And what are some lofty goals, or what's the future look like for your account and presence on TikTok in the next 2 years? I'll start with you, Dimple.
Oh gosh. So I think for me, anyone who thinks they know where social is going to be in 2 years is lying, because things just change so quickly all the time. I mean, all I want to know is that we're still getting more capacity and resource for social teams to keep growing and to keep being considered an important part of any brand's marketing strategy. It's not just like the intern doing it or like an add-on for a campaign. It can be really central to making sure that whatever goals you have, whatever communications or marketing goals you have, can really succeed. So, I think we've got a pretty good system in place in terms of how UNHCR works on TikTok. But I do think things like monetization is going to become more and more important, just because that's how it always is. It feels, more and more creators are going to be there, and more creators are going to have a lot more power in real life as well, because of their TikTok presence. More and more opportunities will come up. And so for us, because I'm particularly focused on how we work with our Goodwill ambassadors, our celebrity supporters, TikTok is a great prospecting tool for that. And we are starting to work more and more with digital and social media influencers who have causes that they care about. And especially from a younger age group. So how can we kind of indoctrinate them to support a cause, or think about how to support the UN as a digital first creator, alongside our kind of stable of actors and musicians and all of that. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Tom or Dan? Same question.
Yeah, I think the shift for our company hasn't been giant. Like we still are not at a point where we're going out and shooting just for TikTok. And I think that's like our next evolution the next year is like going out and like thinking like, okay, we have these long form videos that we shoot for our YouTube channel, for our Snapchat channel. And we have short form content that we're shooting for Instagram. What's our TikTok going to look like on as far as that side? I think in the next year, you'll see a lot more talent focused stuff. We have a lot of internal talent that have built their own pages really well on TikTok, and we're adding more and more every month basically. So figuring out what the balance is between our curated and sports highlights that we film ourselves and the amazing like good feel type of content that we're getting as well, and then adding in some of that talent stuff. I think those are the key things. And then I think for the company's focus, it's interesting. Like TikTok's now our biggest page, right? Like there's no other page that we have more followers. And that happens so fast that I think, we've been able to kind of not put it on the back burner, but not have to focus on it as much because we've been able to grow it with the resources we have now. Whereas like those other, it's much harder for us to grow our Instagram accounts. We have to put a little bit more time and effort into that. So it's almost like a catch-22. Like the success has almost been like, oh, like we're in a good spot there, So I think in the next year, you'll see us dump a little bit more into that to see how big we can really make it and make it like one of our focal points.
Very cool.
So yeah, from my perspective, it's an exciting place to experiment with and really get that instant feedback. I love TikTok in terms of the positivity of the community. That's a real plus, when you've been working away on other social platforms where the audiences are maybe a little bit older and a little bit more cynical, that can wear you down. So it is an important platform for us, I think, in terms of getting out there to those new audiences. I'd say the majority of my time and my team's time is geared towards monetizing our content now. So TikTok isn't as much of a priority as other channels. For example, where we monetize our content on Facebook and Snapchat Discover and YouTube. So that there's got to be a balance there, so it may be that we go more towards a kind of a monetized approach or a sponsored content approach in future.
I mean, I really can't thank you guys enough for all your thoughtful responses. And we have a few questions from the chat and audience, and I think these can be general. So if anybody wants to jump in, what advice would you give to a brand that says, I know I need to be there, but I don't know how?
I get asked that all the time, actually. And I was just talking to my friend who runs a YouTube channel for electric vehicles, and it just basically it's his home brand, and he loves electric cars. And also, people from the financial industry and stuff like that. So what is your brand's unique thing that you think would appeal? And I think there's audiences out there for all kinds of topics under the sun. It may be that they're slightly smaller audiences, but there may well be a hashtag for financial advisors, and there's definitely a hashtag for EVs. So I think it's just about showing that core audience what you're passionate about, and maybe surprising them with something that's a bit quirky and unique. A cousin of mine actually runs a TikTok account for Edmunds, and the thing that gets car people really excited is like the electric port on the Tesla. The smooth action of the opening of the port kind of thing. So unusual, quirky little things that your community will really love, and what makes your company unique, or what makes fans of your type of content excited. There's always something out there for you on TikTok, I think.
I love that. Here's a good question. What sort of tools are you guys using on your? I mean, are you making your TikToks in all on your phone? Are you editing them in Final Cut or another editing software? And what's the best practice for converting a widescreen video to TikTok's mobile format? Maybe Tom or Dimple.
Yeah, so we started off by just using the app's native tools to create and push out content. But now I tend to use this app called InShot, which is free and it's really good. So you can get a 16:9 video and then you can crop it so that it's vertical and you can focus on which kind of bit of the clip to focus on, and you can add captions and stuff as well. But TikTok themselves did tell us that they like it when you use the native tools because it makes you spend longer on the app basically, and filters and things like that, and that will kind of trigger the algorithm. So but then also depending on your resources, like you can create TikToks on things like Premiere Pro and Final Cut, to make it look as though it was made on the app, but actually it's a very slick production. I'm sure you guys have seen the Washington Post's TikTok account,
Dave's great.
which is amazing, and everyone thinks that it was just made on this guy's phone, but actually he spends hours and hours producing, filming, and editing it to the point where now I think it's his full-time job. So it's really weird that it's like such a high production value content, which is made to look raw and authentic. But for those who don't have those resources, I'd recommend kind of InShot, and then if you can invest in like a video editing tool, I would do so.
Is that InShot, INSHOT?
Yeah. IN and then capital SHOT. Yeah. But there are others out there as well. Like there's like Mojo and kind of free mobile editing apps that also do the job.
And Tom, are you guys using just the native app or anything special?
Yeah, so our tech team, we have an internal app that's very similar to InShot, that allows us to kind of crop things differently and all that. A lot of the like basketball highlights we film, we do film vertically already, and that has been a change ever since IG Story kind of came into the fold. So when we have a really big basketball game and we go film like LaMelo Ball, who's like one of the best rookie NBA players right now, like we always send a vertical camera too. So we have like all of his vertical footage all shot on iPhone. I will say, like, TikTok would be mad at me for saying this. Like, we don't always crop our videos to 9:16 to be vertical. I know that that's like a sin in the TikTok world, but like we had some text at the top and bottom. We'll throw a square on there for us. Again, it's just like, what's going to be, I just try to think about how I would feel if I were watching it. And if I scroll and I see one square video with text, then I think it looks interesting and it's coming from a bigger account. It's worked for us, but I know that in the beginning stages, when you're first getting started, the more vertical you can be, the better.
Another question from the chat. How often do you feel an organization should post on TikTok, keeping in mind you don't want to overwhelm resources? How did you all determine what your posting schedule was going to be for TikTok?
I can go real quickly. For me, I think that with TikTok, like, I've never thought about it where it's like that. Like, you never want to post just to post. Like, the way that you're going to grow and the way you're going to get a better account is by posting stuff that's going to work and that's going to do well and that you're confident in. So I focused less on posting like, oh, how many times can we get stuff up a day? Where on Instagram, it's a little bit more like that. To instead being, okay, like what are my few posts that are going to do super well? I wouldn't, if you do have a million things that are really good, I wouldn't be super concerned with overwhelming your audience, just because most of your views, if it's good, is going to come from the For You page and get served to people that don't follow you anyways. So I wouldn't be that concerned with overdoing it if you have all this great stuff. I mean, obviously there's a balance, but the way I think about it more is just like, okay, if I have quality stuff, I'm going to get it out. And some days that's 2 posts a day. Some days that's 10 posts a day. It just depends on kind of what I have and like what I think will do well.
I would say from my perspective, we don't post that often. It's maybe once a day at the most. I think we've had a couple of events like Guinness World Records Day where we had, maybe 6 or 7 really great videos. And I found that they like all kind of performed in an average kind of way, not kind of underperformed. I don't know whether they cancelled each other out. They weren't any less great quality than our usual videos, but so I would say maybe once a day, maybe twice a day at the most. But I guess it really depends how engaged your audience are, and Yeah.
So we have, I think we maybe have time for 1 or 2 more questions. We have Kara Burke in the chat. And for those of you who don't know, she runs the Daily Mail TikTok, and she has a question for you, Tom. In your opinion, is it better to have one monster channel with 16 million, or is it worth to branch out and have niche channels, which you guys also have? Do you ever feel like your accounts are competing with each other?
That is a good question. What's up, Kara? Love the Daily Mail. So they don't compete with each other a ton because they're a lot more focused on individual sports. But we've had to make the decision a few times, on TikTok, if you post the same video in multiple places, it doesn't work. Like on Instagram, like I can post something on the Overtime account, like a football play, and then our football account can also post it, and they're not going to hurt each other. Where on TikTok, if we both post the same video, odds are the Overtime post is going to do super well, and our football channel, it's going to tank it. So there has been a few instances where it's like, hey, which account does it belong on? In sports, there's just enough stuff to be able to go around to like both all of our channels, which I think is great. But when I'm thinking about, so I think it's always powerful to have one monster account, right? Like people know Overtime for that. When a brand comes to us, the main channel, but to be able to those niche ones,
I think we lost you there for a minute, Tom.
I'm back. Oh, it's the best thing I said all day. No, I'm just kidding.
So
what I was saying was, I think it's awesome to have a main channel. Oh, good.
Oh, no, yeah, you're back.
Okay. Oh, cool. Go ahead. I'm done.
No. All right, fair enough. One last question, and I've gotten asked this question a lot. It's some people feel very strongly about it, and some people feel that they're not important. Is there any particular hashtag strategy that you guys implement? What do you feel is important, or does it not matter? And it's the quality of your content.
I can take this one, but yeah. So first of all, definitely use hashtags, but we would say don't overuse them. We kind of try and attach it to trending ones, but only when it's most relevant. And we only tend to use around 1 to maybe maximum 4 hashtags, depending again on the content. And one thing we found, well, 2 things we found is like never use hashtag for you page or hashtag FYP. It's a myth. It doesn't work. So, stay away from that. And then the other thing we have noticed that when we use niche hashtags, that tends to do really well. So for example, if we have like a poetry or a dog video or whatever, we won't just say, dogs of TikTok or TikTok dogs. We'll do a bit of research into finding kind of niche hashtags which have only been used between 100,000 and 1 million times. And we kind of sprinkle in the ones that are most relevant. And we found that is a great little kind of tip to get it to kind of more eyeballs on the For You page. I don't remember how we came to that conclusion. I think TikTok themselves might have told us that, but again, it's a great little trick.
Anything else, Tom or Dan?
I'd say we don't use a lot, maybe none in some cases, and maybe 1 or 2 if it looks like a subject that maybe Dimple says maybe 1 million views of a hashtag for Taekwondo or something like that. We cover quite a wide range of subjects. So like today we had a guy stacking Jenga blocks, and the most Jenga blocks stacked on a single upright Jenga. So hashtag Jenga would make sense in that case. But I would say, yeah, absolutely don't use For You page or all that stuff. You see so much of that, and it really doesn't help, I don't think. It's not going to get your content out there any further. But if there are passion groups on there, look out for what they've been posting and try and make your content relevant for that. One thing we've noticed actually with hashtags trends on the Discover section is people just put hashtags, whatever hashtag is out there being used, they'll stick it on their content whether it's relevant or not, which I think is kind of a cheap way of getting views, but I don't know whether it works. It just ends up annoying me personally, but I'd say keep it relevant and find those passion groups.
One thing I'd just add quickly is Overtime, we actually create our own hashtag, just shout out OT, and it goes on every single one of our posts. And then we've seen other fans use it too. And it's been like a cool curation tool for us too, to find other people's content that we want to share on our pages. So that's the only thing I would add on hashtags. If you're starting from scratch, if you want to create something that's just always going to be on your videos, I think it's a cool little addition. And if it's short, it's easy to add.
Love that. Back to community. Well, thank you all so much for attending today's webinar, and thank you to the panelists. If you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to check out our full TikTok benchmarks and strategy guide for brands. You can find the link in the chat window. We'll also be sending it in an email following this webinar, and along with a recording of this webinar. It includes a free trial of Conviva Social Insights platform, which provides a comprehensive metrics across all your social platforms, including TikTok. So once again, thank you guys so much. I really cannot thank you guys enough for your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I encourage everybody here in the chat to go out and follow these people on social and follow their handles.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys.